All right, so we are looking at activity 132 on making holes. We're going to use Fusion 360 to do that. There's a quick PowerPoint presentation where we talked about these things. There's simple holes that go all the way through, a counter bore hole that can accept like a bolt or a bolt head or something that's a hexagon, and then the countersink hole that's going to be tapered usually at 82 degrees. So the tapered kind of a square top, and these are all through holes. These are all blind holes. They don't go all the way through. These are symbols that you use when you're doing hole notation that we're going to do when you work on this particular assignment. So when you work on the assignment, we're going to use these symbols. They're very important that you understand. This is the diameter of the hole. This tells you how far it goes. This is for a countersink. Again, usually tapered at 82 degrees, and this little bucket symbol is for the counter bore. So this is how you would read the hole notation in terms of doing it. We're going to do it in Fusion 360, so we're going to end up with a couple of pictures that we're going to do. We're going to do 4 practice holes and then get you started on the assignment. So together, what we want to do is we want to make this part. So that's the goal. So I'm going to have this part over here on my side screen so that I can see it as I'm going. And this is just a practice. I'm going to call it hole block. So the first thing I want to do is save. When I'm in Autodesk, I want to make sure I'm saving to the lesson 1-3 folder. And I'm just going to call it hole block and hit save. So I should have a part called hole block. Next thing, always want to start with a new component, and I'm going to call this practice hole making. All right, there we go. So there's my start. I'm going to sketch. I'm going to sketch in the XY plane, and when I do this, I am going to make a rectangle. The rectangle that I make is going to be 3 inches tall by 5 inches long. So make sure I'm in inches, and I am. 5 inches by 3 inches. Hit enter. Everything should be constrained. Finish my sketch. When I finish this sketch, I'm going to extrude this 2 inches out. So really super simple part. Really super simple. There we go. 2 inches out. And I have the simplest part that I could have overall. Now I'm continuing to try to make this part right here, and in the directions down here a little bit, once you have your 5 by 2 by 1 or by 3 block, we're going to place 4 holes at the 1, 2, 3, and 4 inch marks. So right in the center on the top. I tried to make this part as simple as possible. So I'm going to create a sketch on this surface. So I'm going to click on the surface, then go up here to sketch. And what I want to do as I do that, well, first of all, notice that it flipped it around. So I'm going to go back to make it the direction that I want it to be. I don't like that it flips it around like that when you do it. And I am going to put a couple of very simple points on here so that I know where my hole is going to be. I could use this circle and push those through, but then I'm not going to be able to use that hole notation later. And it's much harder to do it as a circle that you extrude through. So I'm just going to put a couple of simple points on my diagram here, and to do that I'm going to use this tool right here called point. So click on point, and I'm going to go in and put a point maybe right about there. And notice if I come over here and kind of scrub on this, it finds that little triangle. That's the center mark. So it's helping me line these up right in the middle of my part. And I don't know if these are right where I want them or not. I will dimension them now so that they are dimensioned properly as they go in. So I'm just going to kind of go from my origin to that point. That should be 1. I'm going to go from my origin to that point. That should be 2, and it is. I'm going to go from my origin to the next one. And that should be 3, and that was. And then I'm going to do that last one. I'm going to go from my origin to that last point. Hey, perfect. That one was 4. And then all of them should be right 1 inch down, 1 inch, and you can see that that one is now fully constrained. I'm not going to apply the 1-inch measurement to the other holes. Instead, I am going to use, I could use either the parallel or the horizontal constraint. I'm going to use the horizontal constraint. And if I click that and that one, those are now locked. If I click that one and that one, those are now locked. And I'm just applying a horizontal constraint to those, so now they are all dimensioned properly. I am going to finish this sketch. Everything is nice and dark and done the way it's supposed to. I'm going to flip it to home, and I now have my 4 parts at the top where I can put a hole. So I am going to just do just that. I'm going to use the hole notation, click on that little circle, and it brings up a dialog box over here. Maybe I'll move that over to this side, or up a little. I'll move my picture, I guess. A little hole dialog box that I can use to make that hole what I want to make the hole. And that very first one is just supposed to be a 1/2 inch, and it goes all the way through the entire part. So that hole is supposed to be a 1/2 inch. So the hole type, it's just going to be a simple hole. It's going to go all the way through. I don't need to have a drill point on it. It can be flat. And it's supposed to go all the way through the entire part. And I need the size of 1/2 inch. There we go. So when I hit OK, I now have my first hole that goes all the way through the part. And if I bring that document in, it should look like this. Just a simple 1/2 inch hole that goes all the way through the entire part. I'm going to do the second hole, and in order to do this, if you notice, all of my marks have disappeared at this point. They didn't disappear, it's just a sketch. I used that sketch when I made the hole. So I made a sketch, I used it when I extruded. I made a sketch, I used it when I made my hole. So the sketch is now considered to be consumed. It's not gone, it's still there. If I go up here and expand this menu and go down to sketches and expand that, I can put that second one back on and make it visible anytime that I want to. And then I can use those other marks to make my other holes. Alright, so the second hole, now that I know how I'm going to do it, is this one right here. It's supposed to have a diameter of 0.375 and go into the part 2 inches. So I'm going to use the hole tool, click on that second dot, and it's supposed to go into the part 2 inches, which that's already set, and it's supposed to have a diameter of 0.375. So if this were something, type 0.375 right there, and come up here and type 2.00 there. And I sometimes make the mistake of hitting enter, and then it makes the hole already. You can always come down here and right click, if it will let me, right click, and edit that. And when you go to edit that hole, it brings that same dialog box right back up so that you can edit it. Because there were some other things. This hole isn't just a simple hole. There's a couple other things here. It's supposed to have a counter bore of 0.75 that goes into the hole, 1/2 inch. So 0.75 counter bore that goes in. So right here I have the option to set what type it is, and I want to use the counter bore, and now I get more options. The counter bore itself for the diameter is supposed to be 0.75, and it's supposed to go into the part 1/2 inch. And now I can hit OK, and I have my hole that is counterbored into the part the way that it is supposed to be counterbored in. Third hole. So I'm going to go to the third hole now. The third hole, if I read the directions, is a 1/4 inch hole that goes in 2 1/4 inches. So let's do that first. I'm going to use my hole notation, click on my sketch. It is supposed to be a 1/4 inch hole that goes into the part 2.25 inches. And this one, if I continue now, this one is supposed to be countersink with a diameter of 1 inch at 82 degrees. So once again, I can look at the hole type. I want countersink, and it gave me options now. 82 degrees is always the default, but I want it to be 1 inch. There we go, a 1 inch countersink at 82 degrees. And if I hit enter, that hole should be done. And that's what it looks like when you kind of spin it around. Nice. All right. Last hole. The last hole that I'm doing looks like it is a 1/2 inch, goes all the way through. It's counter bore, 0.75 goes in 0.625. So, go up to my hole notation, click on my last hole spot. What you had for your last hole that you made automatically populates, but I want this one not to be countersunk, but counter bore. And when it's counter bore, it's a 1/2 inch hole. So I'm going down there to 0.5. The bucket is 0.75 on the bucket, and the bucket goes into the hole 0.625. And it's supposed to go all the way through. So for distance, I'm going to select all the way through. And then even if the part gets bigger, it'll always go all the way through. I'm going to hit OK. And there we go. 4 holes completely done. What I am going to do with this hole is put it onto a drawing sheet. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to go to File. And I am going to create a new drawing from it, from Design. It's probably going to ask me to save. I'm going to use my title block that I made for the class this year and hit OK. Keep in mind that you want your front view always to be the side that's going to have the most information. So in this case, when I'm populating, that's not going to be true because this side right now is just a square side. It doesn't give me any information about the hole at all, or the holes that I made. So one of the things I could do is I could go back to the part and I could reorientate the part so that a different side is the front view, or even right here, I could just change this so that the top side, which does have a lot more information than the other part that I looked at, is my front view. So I'm going to drop that in as my front view. So I'm just going to click, and there it is. And then I'm going to hit maybe a scale of 1 to 2. Maybe even a scale of 1 to 1 so it's nice and big. And we can see everything really well on it. To be able to dimension it. Maybe 1 to 2. That's pretty good. Alright, 1 to 2. And I'm going to hit OK. So there's my part. Right click, project view. I'm going to project a view over here so that I can get other dimensioning things done. And then I'm also going to project an isometric up there and get a projection. I don't think I need that one. This one, double right click on it. That's usually shaded. I'm sorry, I left clicked and I double clicked. Okay, documentation. Always have to dimension the part. In order to dimension the part, you need to know all of the widths and overall dimensions. So I'm going to dimension this side, and that should be 5, and I'm going to put that probably up here somewhere. I'm going to dimension this direction, and that was my 2, and then I got to dimension this one, and that was 3. So I now do have my overall dimensions for the part. I need to put some center marks on these holes, some center marks on them. So I'm going to use the center mark tab, click, and I'm just going to put center marks on my holes because that way I'm going to be able to dimension them. And dimensioning these it's going to be pretty easy. Click on dimensioning tool. I'm going to dimension the first one as 1 inch, the second one is 1 inch or 2 inches, the third one as 3 inches. If you don't have center marks, you can't do this. There we go. Looks great. And the last thing I'm probably going to do is just dimension where the centers of all those are as 1 inch, and they are all in line, so I don't need to dimension every one of those individually, especially with how the part was made. To dimension the holes, holes can be put off to the bottom and to the left of the part. That is an acceptable way to note where holes are. I'm still going to use the dimension tool, and I'm going to do this one first. So I'm going to click on that ring right there. And what I want to do is I want to make sure I get the size of the hole first, not the counter bore. So the hole was 1/2 inch. Click, drag it down, and drop it right there. If I double click on this now, I'm going to hit escape to get out of the dimensioning tool. If I double click on this now, I can add some additional text to it. So I don't want to change that caret diameter circle 0.5. I am going to hit space though, and in capital letters right through, and that's good. And then I need to say what the bucket is on that particular hole. And this is because you can hit return to make it better, or I can make it a straight line. Maybe I'll make this one a straight line. So I'm going to go up to the symbols, and there's all kinds of symbols, and I want that little bucket symbol to represent that that was a counter bore. And that counter bore was 0.75. And then another little symbol, the down arrow symbol, that one, and it goes into the part 0.625. And I can hit close. Oop. Apparently I did not get the 0.625. There we go. So I just gave a description of that particular hole exactly as it was written in the directions. Now if you notice in the directions they broke it up over 2 lines. You don't have to do that, and that is tricky in order to do that when you're documenting it here. So the next hole, I'm once again going to come up here to the dimensioning tool. I'm going to get the hole, not the countersink, the hole, and that hole was not that measurement. Sure I get the hole. There we go. And I can drag that down maybe underneath it right there so that I can document what that one is. That was a 0.25. Hit escape so I get out of my dimensioning tool. Double click. I'm going to start right there in space. It went into the part. So I'm going to use the into arrow. Space. Oops. Double click. Double click. 2.25, and it was a countersink, space, 1.00 at, so I use the small x for at 82, and I'm going to hit done for just 1/2 second here. Where's my mouse? There we go. Double click on that, space, 82. And then there's a degree symbol. There we go. Done. So I have one hole noted, a second hole noted. I am going to go ahead and do that third hole. So I'm going to select the dimensioning tool. Make sure you get the hole and not the counter bore. I might bring this one over here a little bit so that I can write with it. And this one was 0.375. But notice when it came in here, it wrote it as 0.38. That's because you can set the precision, how many decimal places it's going to record when you're doing dimensioning. So if I double click on this, escape, double click on it, one of the things that I can do is I can set the precision, linear precision. It says 2 places past the decimal. If I change that to 3 places past the decimal, I do get the number that I'm interested in having. So that's kind of an important tool to know that that exists. It was 0.375. It goes into the part 2 inches. So I'm going to use that little down arrow. Goes into the part 2 inches. And it is a counter bore. And the counter bore is 0.75. And the counter bore goes into the part, 1/2 inch. Enter. So at this point, that dimensioning line went off the page a little bit. We can just move it over. It's fine. There we go. So now we can see all. Remember, when you're doing holes, holes are never, ever, ever done with a straight line. So it should never go straight down, straight left. They're always done at an angle. last hole to dimension was this one. So I'm going to use my dimensioning tool. Make sure you grab the hole. I'm going to put it up over here. This was the simplest one that we had to do, and it was just a through hole that was 0.5 and went through. A through hole that went 0.5 and through. Double click. Oh, hit escape to get out of your dimensioning tool. Double click, and I'm just going to write that it is a through hole, and enter. And just move it over a little bit so that it looks great. There you go. Everything is completely dimensioned. One last note at the end of this video. If you did want to break one of these lines up so that it had a top and a bottom, like almost like you'd hit return, that can be tricky to do. And the reason it's tricky is because when you double click to edit it, if you click somewhere, like let's say I want to return right there, if I hit enter or return, it thinks I'm done typing, and it uses that as the done. So I have to double click, go to where I'd like there to be a return. You have to hold down shift, and if you hold the shift key and then hit enter, it does put a hard break in there. So I do want you to do that for a couple of these. I'm going to go over to this one. I'm going to put a hard break right after that, and then hit close, and maybe reorientate it a little bit, because some of these look just a little bit nicer. If you do have that hard break to differentiate right where the top of it is compared to where the bottom or the bucket. So sometimes you'll see hole notation written like that. Either way, it's fine to have it as a straight line, but this is pretty typical to show what the hole is and then what the counterbore or countersink is. So once you have this sheet, this is what you're going to turn in, is a printed sheet that looks like this. There's no reason to upload this into Schoology, and then go back to the assignment and follow the rest of the directions.